Okay, welcome to Psych 232 Psych 235, child psychology. Today we're talking about adolescence. We're still on the chapter of adolescence and we're still on cognitive development. So we're going to be finishing up this today. So we're talking about things that impact adolescents' thinking. Okay, so we talked about a bunch of other stuff before. Today we're going to talk about technology and other issues. So let's start with this, PowerPoint slide here on that says digital natives. Okay, so here's the thing about adolescents growing up today, or people who are adolescents. They've grown up with technology, so they are considered digital natives. Basically, they haven't known a time without the internet, without computers, without smartphones. Okay, so they are native to all this technology. It's easier for them to use it. It's easier for them to adopt it, and they're used to it. So the smartphone has become particularly important in creating digital natives, even among low SES adolescents, and even of every ethnic group. So the smartphone, right, gives you access to the internet, gives you access to websites, gives you access to a whole bunch of information. It's basically the world at your fingertips with these smartphones. Okay, and even students that are low SES, or even adolescents that are low SES, and that means low socioeconomic status, even those that come from poor households have access to smartphones nowadays. Not all of them, but a lot of them actually do now. And even every ethnic group, whether you're Black, Latino, white, Asian, they're all growing up with technology, and most of them have access to a smartphone, which means they have the world at their fingertips as far as information. Okay, there are still some discrepancies in the number and quality of devices, right, that still follow the SES lines. What that means is that, the poor adolescents, still use the lower quality devices, the ones that are cheaper, right? Whereas the ones that are better off are going to use the more expensive products, like the Apple products. I mean, like the phones that cost like $1,000. Okay, there are cheaper smartphones that cost only a couple of $100, or you can even buy used ones. Even people in other countries have smartphones now. Not as much as people here, but even in poor countries, because they get them used. Okay, and you can get them really cheap if you get them used. Where do you think all those smartphones go, right? When you upgrade your smartphone, right, and you sell it back to Apple or to some other service on the internet, and they give you like $50 for it or $20 for it, whatever it is, they hardly give you anything. Where do you think those smartphones end up? They end up in other countries, and they sell them over there for those people who cannot afford new devices. They get them used. Okay, there is still a digital divide when it comes to technology. There are still some people who are at a disadvantage. And the digital divide is based on age. What that means is that older people have less access to technology. They're less comfortable with technology. They're less accepting of it. They don't know how to use it as well. So that's where the divide is. The divide used to be between rich and poor, right? That those that were rich could afford the technology and those that were poor could not. Okay, that's kind of gone away. And even the poor now could afford technology, could afford to have the internet, and because you can even get free internet now, and these smartphones that give you access to the internet, 24/7. But there is still a divide when it comes to that has to do with age. Older people are less comfortable with technology, less comfortable using these smartphones, these devices, and they can't even get the old types of phones anymore. They don't sell those anymore, and so they have to try to learn to use these smartphones, and they have trouble with them. Not all of them. Okay, it's a stereotype that they all can't use technology, but a lot of them do. Okay, that is where the divide is. Those are the people who are less comfortable with technology. And look at this class that we're having here, right? It's remote learning through the internet, right? We're using PowerPoint, we're using Canvas, we're using all this technology. And those that are older are the ones who struggle more using all this technology. Okay, using Turnitin, all this stuff. Let's keep going. Now, this technology is going to have an effect on how people think and how adolescents think. Okay, we're talking about adolescents. So Technology can actually speed up education during the adolescent years. It can make education better. It can make it, because it's information at your fingertips. It makes it easier for you to access resources, access, books and journal articles, like I teach you guys how to access, right? Easier to do your work online, right? We use Canvas. It makes things easier and more convenient, but it subverts other kinds of thinking, other kinds of learning. It makes other kinds of learning and other kinds of thinking actually worse. Okay, things that require reflection and critical thinking, it seems that the internet technology isn't so good for that. Okay, think about YouTube videos, for instance. You go and you watch these YouTube videos, and you get to watch stuff that you want to watch, right? And what happens, the way YouTube works, and a lot of websites work, is when you look up one thing, they show you other videos that are related that you might be interested in. Okay. And the thing is that if you're a climate change denier, let's say, and you look up a video of somebody spewing information about how climate change isn't real and that it's nonsense and all this stuff, you watch that video, and then YouTube is going to feed you other videos that also tell you that climate change isn't real and all this nonsense, right? And so what happens is you end up getting a very biased point of view. You end up getting stuff that just reflects what you already believe, and you don't get to really carefully evaluate information. You don't get to so much look at the other side and look at the other arguments. So it's not very good for critical thinking, especially when you watch these YouTube videos, right? Especially as it relates, it says, to evaluation of what is seen on the screen. Research shows that adolescents, and not just adolescents, but also a lot of adults, don't really think critically about what they're watching in those videos. You need to remember when you watch those YouTube videos that those people, a lot of those people, the vast majority of them, are not experts on anything. Okay, but they're out there making their videos, talking about this and that, right? Denying climate change, or talking about how electric cars are awful, or some other thing. Some of the things that, some of them know what they're talking about, but you have to remember that even the ones that know what they're talking about, they're not experts, right? What they're doing. They're creating these YouTube videos, hoping that a bunch of people will watch them. And if their message is something that's popular, they'll get a lot of views, and then more people will watch their videos, but they're not necessarily experts. See, YouTube, what it's done is YouTube has democratized education. And what I mean is that that education is no longer just in the hands of the experts. It's no longer just in the hands of teachers and professors and experts who know what they're talking about. But now everyone can make a YouTube video talking about this and that. And a lot of people watch them and are basically, and believe this stuff. There's videos out there about conspiracy theories, about a bunch of nonsense, how there's fraud, about this or that, about our election is being stolen. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? And people watch these things and they're convinced by this stuff. And sometimes they get exposed to this extreme and even dangerous information. Where do you think people get their information about, joining hate groups and all that stuff? Although YouTube is now trying to ban some of this stuff, hate speech and things like that, right? But that's what happens. Parents sometimes, are surprised that their kid or their adolescent, is in some white supremacist group, or that, believes those things, believe some of their, is into those beliefs. And they're surprised that we didn't teach him that. We don't know where he got it. You know where he got it? On the internet. That's where he got it. And now that YouTube and Facebook and all these websites are cleaning up their act and trying to get rid of hate speech and this stuff about conspiracy theories and all these lies about stuff that is actually dangerous for people to follow and believe that stuff, there's other websites that are popping out and taking their place, where those people can go to and hear their hate speech, right? And promote their racist, nationalist views and all these other nonsense about conspiracy theories. That is what is happening. That is what you're seeing, right? So a lot of these adolescents, and not just adolescents, but also adults, they watch these videos. They're just fed information about what they believe. They don't really think about whether it's true or not. They just believe it. And they keep getting more information that suggests that this is actually right. And they develop these extreme views, right? And that's where a lot of this nonsense comes from that you're hearing, right? Why we are so divided is because we're listening to a bunch of extreme views on the internet. And like I said, information is no longer controlled just by those who are educated, just by those who have the degrees, those who have the credentials. Now everyone is out there, right, giving their opinion. And some of those people are misleading people and getting them to believe just a bunch of racist nonsense, nationalistic nonsense, and actually promoting very dangerous kinds of thinking that could tear this country apart, by the way. You guys know this is happening, and it's not right. Okay, let's keep going. But that's what happens when you give access to information. And in one sense, it could be good, more access to information. On the other sense, well, you got to think about it. Is the information credible? And adolescents don't always know how to judge that, how to determine if something is credible versus not credible. Sexual abuse can also occur if especially if you are not thinking critically about who you're meeting and who you're talking to and all that stuff. We worry a lot about online sexual predators, for instance, but research shows that solicit online sexual abuse is actually rare. When it comes to sexual abuse, less than 1% is actually, it has to do with people that they met online. There are cases like that, and parents worry about that stuff, that they're chatting with somebody they met online, some friend they made online, and then they decide to meet, and turns out to be some older man, some sexual predator taking advantage of their adolescent. That happens in less than 1% of the cases of sexual abuse. More likely, when sexual abuse does occur, it's somebody else who's reaching out to them, somebody that they know, a friend, a coach, even a member of the clergy, a relative. That's who was more likely to commit the actual sexual abuse. And yeah, they communicate, they get in touch with them in all sorts of ways, even online, and as a parent, you may not know who your kid is talking to, who your adolescent is talking to online, because there's a whole bunch of stuff online and it's really easy to hide things, right? And mom may not know everything that you're doing online. Okay. Sexual harassment in social network is also common, right? People harass each other. Even especially after a breakup, let's say they're together or something like that. They met at school or something, or whatever it is, and they also communicate online, and they break up. And when they break up, guess what happens? They start talking all this crap about each other online, because they still know you're online, and you post a picture, and they'll say that you're ugly and stupid, and they'll make sexual comments, all kinds of things like that, and they harass each other. Okay, and teenagers can be very mean, especially online. Okay, this happens, and it's not just, by the way, it's not just adolescents who are doing this stuff. It's also adults, it's also grown-ups who are acting like adolescents. Okay, there's a lot of harassment online. I mean, because we are such a divided country, when people post something online that happens to be, political or controversial or something like that, they get attacked by a bunch of people. Okay, and that's what happens. Okay, online. And that's harassment. May not be sexual harassment, right? As in, that happens after relationships, online and stuff. But that is still harassment. Now, when we do find out that there's a sexual harassment going on, right? The discussion is, and we talk about these things. That's actually, what the way adolescents think of it is they're usually outraged against the individual, right? How could he, how could she do that or say that, right? They're less likely to think about the sexism or even the homophobia that's actually driving it. Okay, that's a better discussion to have, a broader discussion that needs to be had. Okay, that yes, we do have problems. We do have a lot of sexism, and we have a lot of harassment, sexual harassment, especially online. A lot of commenting on people's looks. Why do we have to comment on people's looks? Why do we have to attack each other about people's looks? Especially women get attacked a lot about what they wear. Okay, that's all part of the sexist society that we live in. Okay, and adolescents often miss that broader discussion that needs to be had. More about technology and cognition, technology and thinking, right? Social networking. Okay, yes, there's a lot of social networks. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, right? There's Instagram. There's all these social networks now. I can't even keep up with all of them. Okay. But adolescents, they join these social networks as well. And they can benefit from joining social networks in some ways, but there can be problems in other ways. We'll talk about that, okay? So adolescent cognitive growth benefits from shared experiences and opinions. You get to talk to people online. At least, you get to type and communicate, and that's good, right? For adolescents to, to express their opinions, express their thoughts. That's good, right? But often communication via the internet can bolster fragile self-esteem. It's also good for those people who may feel lonely or miserable, that would have trouble making friends. It's a lot easier to make friends on the internet, although you have to ask yourself if they're real friends, right? If you really know these people, right? Or if they're just pretending. But it can be good for those kind of people. If you have low self-esteem, you can feel a lot better by talking to friends online and finding people who share your interests. Okay, it's very easy to find people who share your interests on the internet, on social networking sites. Because if you have a certain interest in some certain kinds of movies or cars or whatever it is, there are others out there just like you, and sometimes these social networks will actually feed you information that you should join this page and that page, or join this group, and there you can meet other people like yourself who share those interests. Adolescents sometimes share personal information online without thinking about the possible consequences. That's a bad thing. People share personal information, especially adolescents, without thinking about it. They may basically talk about like where they live, and I'm not just talking about, the state and city they live in, but, around where they live. Oh, it's around this place and stuff like that. Or sometimes even give out their address or phone number to people they meet online. Okay. People can use that information against them. Okay. If they're not careful. It actually doesn't take much to share that personal information, by the way. You're doing it all the time and you don't even know it. Here's the thing, even if you're not typing stuff up there about where you live and where you go and where you eat or anything like that, sometimes you do. Many times people do this, especially adolescents. They talk about, oh yeah, I went to eat at this place and over here, right? Or I went to this other place. But even if you don't share that information, your smartphone, your tablet, whatever you're using, your computer, when you use these devices, are actually tracking you. They're keeping track of your information, where you go. Okay, because remember, you take these smartphones and tablets with you everywhere, right? Especially the smartphone, right? Where you go, right? How much time you spent there, all that stuff, what pages you go to, and all this information is available. Not available, but what I'm saying, all this information is out there. And someone who knows how to get access to it can get access to it. It can be used by law enforcement and things like that, if, to track down criminals, but it can also be used by hackers and other people who just want to steal your identity, or they want to target you or something like that. It's actually very easy to find out, where somebody goes, where they live, and all that stuff. Okay, and even where they work. You don't need a lot of information, believe it or not. That's the danger of these social networks. They're collecting all this information about us, and we don't even know it. We don't even have to disclose it ourselves. There's also other dangers. There's cyberbullying. Yes, adolescents can be very mean, and they bully each other even online. That's cyberbullying, okay? They spread insults about one another through social media, through email. They send really mean text messages or post, videos, cell phone videos, and even show it to their friends and things like that. That's cyberbullying. It's basically bullying online. It happens a lot, okay? I think most bullying now happens online rather than in person, because we're always on our devices nowadays. I'm not an adolescent, but I'm also, just like you guys, addicted to technology, and I use it all the time. Cyberbullying can contribute to a dangerous self-destructive behavior, right? Remember, adolescents have very fragile egos, okay? They're just developing their identities, and they care a lot about what their peers think, okay? And they have very fragile egos. So people attacking them and calling them names and saying they're stupid, ugly, making sexual comments or saying really mean sexual things about them, right? They can feel really awful and become suicidal. And it has happened that many adolescents have actually taken their own lives after being bullied online. It is that dangerous. It happens a lot. Anonymity often brings out the worst in people. You often don't know who it is that is attacking you, right? They have a certain name or whatever it is. That's not necessarily the real name. But somebody doesn't like you and is attacking you online. And sometimes it's just people who just attack people for fun on the internet. There's people who we call trolls, right? All they do is just talk a bunch of nonsense on the internet and attack this person or that person, attack this viewpoint or that view. There's a bunch of that going on online. It's called trolling. Okay. And, you know, adolescents are very fragile. Their egos are fragile, and they can become suicidal, become depressed and miserable. Um, it's a very dangerous thing, and you need to be aware as a parent. You have adolescents of what they're doing online, who they're talking to, all that stuff. It could be seen as an invasion of privacy, right? But you have to talk to them, and you have to know, right? And when they get these kind of things, you need to talk to them and advise them, and tell them how to handle it, right? Just because somebody is insulting them online doesn't mean that they should take those things to heart or that those things are true. People will attack anybody. There's also problems with sexting. Sexting is when basically people send, like nude images, over the internet to each other, or actually on their smartphones. They how you can send an image on your smartphone, right? Or even a text message. Students, adolescents especially, and even adults will often send naked pictures of themselves to someone that they're hoping will like them. Or they'll send messages about sexual things. That's called sexting, okay? Instead of texting, you're sending sexual messages, whether they're visual or written. As many as 30% of adolescents report receiving sexting photos, right? Nude pictures or erotic pictures, right, from others. With marked variation by school, gender, ethnicity, and often an attitude. So it matters, okay? In some schools it's more common than others. It's more common among some genders than others. Males are probably more likely to send that stuff out than women, right? Also varies by ethnicity, but it happens a lot. And I can't believe that people are doing this. And it's not just adolescents, also adults sending pictures of themselves to other people, right? Sending dick pics about that kind of stuff, right? And even adolescent girls sending nude pictures of themselves to other boys, hoping that he is going to like them and then ask them out. This nonsense about how we're trying to, convince each other to go out with us nowadays. This is just nonsense, right? But I can't believe people are doing this. And by the way, remember that adolescents are underage, and they're sending this photos to each other, right? Keep in mind that if you as an adult end up with some of those photos, right, you can be arrested for having child pornography, okay? And you might have teenagers that are getting these messages. If you see them or get a hold of those messages, you as a parent can get in trouble. You need to discourage that kind of stuff. Adolescents should not be sending these photos, right? These erotic photos and or nude pictures of themselves, or dick pics, or nipple pics, or whatever the hell you want to call them. It's just ridiculous that people do this. This wasn't done when I was growing up. I mean, we didn't have the technology, but it's just, I can't believe people do this. And adults are just as guilty about this stuff too. They do it too. Even congressmen and senators have been caught sending naked pictures of themselves to somebody they want to seduce that's not even someone who they're married to. This really bad behavior, right? That is happening, right? But it's a problem, and we need to put a stop to it. There are dangers to doing this, right? The pictures may be forwarded without the naked person's consent. Some adolescent sends a naked picture of themselves to, a guy, thinking that he's going to like her and then ask her out or something like that. And then he just shares it with his friends or even posts it online. That's what can happen, right? And it's not just for adolescents. It can also happen for adults as well, right? A lot of stuff ends up online. And once it's online, it belongs to the internet, and you can't get rid of it, okay? Because people share, and they share with other people. Before you know it, it's everywhere, okay? Senders who deliberately send erotic self-images risk serious depression if the reaction is not that they wished, right? You were hoping when you send out one of these images, right, one of these messages, that the person would just like you and then want to be with you, but instead they make fun of you and they share with their friends and they post it on the internet. And guess how you're going to feel after they do that? You're going to feel probably really awful, depressed, even suicidal, right? That you think everyone now knows what you look like naked. You shouldn't be doing that. It's actually very dangerous. More about technology and cognition. For some adolescents, an online chat, message boards, gaming, and all that stuff, even internet gaming can be addicting. Keep in mind that people chat online, but they also play games on the internet, where they play with each other online, right? You don't have to be physically present to play with somebody online, right? And a lot of these video games, even if they're not online, gaming in general is very addictive. Okay, just like a drug, it can be very addictive. It takes away time from play, from schoolwork, from friendships. Many adolescents don't even get enough sleep because they're always on the internet or they're always playing video games. Okay, research shows that the percentage of this addiction to basically to device addiction, to the internet or to gaming, all that stuff, the addiction rates vary from like 0 to 26%. The broad range there has to do with the fact that that different places define addiction in different ways, and therefore some in some countries it's not really seen as a problem, but in other places it is. But if you're spending hours online, every day playing these games or being on the internet, you're addicted. And most of us are addicted to technology, addicted to the internet. Even I am, right? I have to struggle. If I want to stay away from the internet for like a whole day and say, okay, today I'm not gonna look on I'm not gonna go online at all. I'm not gonna go to any websites. I'm not going to read any news. I'm not gonna check my email. I'm not gonna check the social networking sites. I'm not gonna play any video games. I'm not gonna get on a screen at all. It is hard, and most of the time I fail to do that, right? And the reason I'm trying to get away from it is because I use it too much now, okay? Because now I teach online, I'm doing all this stuff online, and it's just too much for my eyes. It's hurting my eyes, okay? It's just, it's making my eyes feel tired all the time. I feel like I haven't gotten enough sleep because of that. And it makes it harder to sleep at night, by the way. And so I'm trying to stay away from it, right? When I'm not working, and most of the time I fail because just like you guys, I have to get on that smartphone. I have to get on that tablet and I have to see what's going on and what's happening and play games and all that stuff. I don't play games as much as you guys, but it's addicting to have the world at your fingertips in these smartphones, in these tablets, right? Whether you're playing games or just chatting or going online, going on social networking sites, it is addicting. People don't even can't even don't even separate from their phones. They even take it with them when they go to the bathroom. The phone is with them at all times, right? Because you have to be have that all that stuff accessible at all times. Let's talk about middle school. Okay, adolescence is when a lot of students start middle school. The first year in middle school, right? Even high school or college, right? Correlates with increased bullying, decreased achievement, depression, and eating disorders. So here's the thing. During adolescence, right, identity is key, right? Identity becomes a big issue. And that is when a lot of students start middle school. And what happens, according to research, is that during middle school, there's a lot more bullying, a lot more teasing and name calling and that kind of stuff. Achievement tends to go down. Sometimes you had, good kids that were doing well in school, and then they become adolescents, and now they want to be cool and hang out and all that stuff, and they don't do as well in school. They're also more likely to get depressed because now they care a lot more about what other people think. And adolescents and young adults can be very, very mean, okay? And, caring too much about how you look and what other people think, right, can also lead to some developing eating disorders, okay? Transitioning from one school to another, by itself will affect your ability to learn, right? You got to adjust to a new school, a new system, so to speak. You went from having like one teacher in like elementary school all day, and now you're in middle school, and now you have different teachers, right? You have like 6 different teachers throughout the day. Changing schools just when the growth spurt is happening, right? And sexual characteristics are developing, creates stress. You're changing, your body's changing. And you're an adolescent, right? Your body is getting ready for adulthood. And at the same time, you're changing schools and meeting new people, and education is changing and all that stuff. And that's going to create stress. Okay, too many changes happening at once. The student-teacher ratio is not favorable. And, junior high and high schools, you're going to have these classes where it's basically like 1 to 40. Okay, one teacher for like 40 students. And you're going to have, a different teacher, every hour or something like that. Okay, you're just going to be a number. You're not going to be just one out of like 20 or something like that, like you might have been in elementary school. You're going to get less attention at a period of time when you actually want more attention, when you care more about what other people think. And that is very stressful. And that is why there's more bullying, decreased achievement, more depression, and more eating disorders during this time. This is when eating disorders actually start. The bullying has to do with people, like I said, teasing each other, calling each other names, picking on each other. This is when it can become a big problem. It's a problem earlier, but it can be especially big problem during adolescence, because teens can be very harsh. Okay. So more about middle school. So there's increasing behavioral problems, right? For many middle school students, academic achievement slows down and behavioral problems decrease. So academic achievement usually gets worse, right? Students that were good may not be so good anymore. They might not want to try as hard anymore. Now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of students who do well, okay, and plenty who were good in elementary school and continue to be good in junior high. But there are many, and I knew a lot of these people when I was growing up, that were really good in elementary school, very good kids, getting very good grades, and then they become adolescents, and all of a sudden they care more about their looks, they care more about hanging out and being cool, and then all of a sudden they're getting D's and F's when they were getting A's before, right? And it's all because of the attitude and because focusing on the wrong things, basically. More behavioral problems, more wanting to hang out, more problems with drugs and bullying and all kinds of things like that. And academic achievement kind of goes down the drain. It's actually very hard, I've heard from teachers, to teach middle school students, okay, because they're very immature and they're not always good students. It's very hard to teach those students. High school is actually better, I heard, because the students are a bit more mature, okay? There's a decline in school interest and engagement. There's more bullying. Change in student-teacher engagement. I talked about the student-teacher ratio, right? How it's not favorable to students, how they get less attention, how students feel like they're just a number and that they don't matter that much. At a time when you actually want more attention, all that is problematic. Let's keep going. Finding acclaim is just more difficult during middle school. Let me explain. So getting recognition, the attention, right, that you want, right, as an adolescent is harder in middle school and in high school, in college, as you move on, okay? Keep in mind, right, adolescents are, remember, very egocentric. They care a lot about how they look, right? They want to be accepted. They want to fit in. They want other people to like them a lot, right? All that stuff. And it's actually harder during middle school and high school, which we'll talk in a moment, to actually impress others, okay? There's a mismatch between egocentrism and changing school structure, right? You're very egocentric, very self-focused. You care a lot about you and what other people think about you, and all of a sudden you're in a school that instead of having hundreds of students might have thousands of students, especially if you live in a big city, right? And like I said, you have like 6 teachers, there's a lot of students there, and well, you're just a small fish in a big pond, so to speak, right? And it's difficult to find that acclaim, to get that recognition, to get that attention, right? Public acclaim is difficult, and many students actually seek peer acceptance. Students want to, adolescents want to stand out. They want to be cool. They want to be recognized. And it's actually harder when there are so many other people. Competitive athletic teams may be too difficult for children with fragile egos. Let's say if you want to find acclaim or get recognition through sports, let's say through getting on the volleyball team or on the track and field team or basketball team, whatever it is, guess what? Now that you are an adolescent, it is actually harder. The competition is a lot tougher. Maybe you thought you were good in elementary school, and all of a sudden you find that you're not even good enough to make the team. So it's harder to get that recognition, hard to get that status. Even if you're just thinking about looks and wanting to be cool, all of a sudden you realize that you're actually not that cool, that you're just average or maybe even below average. You thought you were good looking, but there's so many people and so many good looking people. And you'll find that you actually are not up there where you thought you would be. That's what happens during adolescence, during middle school and high school. The competition when it comes to everything, when it comes to looks, being cool, when it comes to athletics, when it comes to academics, the competition gets tougher. You thought you were smart, right? And now you get to middle school and you find that there's a whole bunch of really smart students, people doing way better than you, or people maybe even way smarter than you. I remember that stuff, that happening, to a lot of people who just were, good students and stuff like that. And then they get to, junior high and high school, and they learn that they're just average now, that other students have advanced and even surpassed them. Because remember, we're developing at all times, right? And a lot of people don't take it very well, right? Because they want to be, among the top. They want to be basically continue to be that A student, continue to be that top student or that top athlete, or continue to think that other people will think you're pretty or cool or whatever it is. And the competition just gets tougher the higher you go. From elementary to middle school to high school to college, in the real world, it is tougher. It's just what happens. As you go higher, the competition gets tougher. There's always other people who are smarter, better looking, right? More athletic. It's always the case. It is rare that you're going to find someone who is just so awesome that they're just going to be awesome all the way through. Those people are rare, but they do exist. People who are so good at something and they continue to excel and end up being famous or something like that, or a really top athlete that makes the NBA, stuff like that. It's just, it just gets harder the older you get. Coping with middle school. So how do you cope with these new challenges, right? What do you believe, for instance, about intelligence? There is what we call an entity approach to intelligence, right? This belief, right, system actually says that ability is innate, right? The idea that that effort enhances achievement is rejected. So the entity approach to intelligence, right, says that intelligence is something you're born with. You can't really do much about it. You either have it or you don't, right? Effort doesn't matter, right? You don't get smarter, right? You're born smart. You don't get smart, okay? That's the entity approach to intelligence, right? And remember, students are competing with each other in middle school and in high school, and they want to succeed, right? They want to get that recognition, that achievement. And many don't, okay? But what do you believe about intelligence, right? Do you believe in the entity approach to intelligence? That is actually a very bad thing to believe. Okay, that intelligence is just something you're born with, that you cannot get smarter, right? The rejection that effort matters, right? That's a very bad way to look at intelligence, a very bad way to look at achievement, okay? And that is very common here in the US. That's what we believe. Hey, if you're smart, you were born smart. It's because of you, right? It's not because you work hard or anything like that. You're just smart. It's just who you are, right? That's the entity approach to intelligence. The incremental approach to intelligence is a different belief about intelligence that is actually a more healthy way of thinking. The belief that intelligence is something that can be increased by effort. The belief that you can get smarter if you try harder, if you work harder, right? That belief, right? That is actually less popular here in the US, that belief. That's actually very popular, very common, that belief system among people who are Asian and Asian Americans and people from Asian countries. They believe that you can actually work harder and become a better student and get smarter and do well, right? They actually believe that your intelligence can grow through effort and things like that. Here in the US, we believe you either got it or you don't. In other countries, especially Asian countries, they believe like, no, you don't have it now, you can get it later, work hard, you can get there, you can become smarter. And that's a very healthy thing to believe, right? The belief that you can get better, that you can get smarter. And you can get better. Go to school, work hard, right? Read, actually try hard, right? Get a good education. And you will actually get smarter. You'll become a better writer, you become better at math and science, better at all those things. And you can succeed, okay? Even if you didn't start off very well. And I can tell you that because that was me. I didn't even know I was actually smart, in elementary school. I was just a regular, average kid, dumb kid. Didn't show much promise until later, until I actually started trying, and I actually found out, hey, I can actually do well. That's what happened to me later on. It happened to me in junior high. You get to high school, and a lot of the problems that you had in middle school continue. Hard to get that recognition. It's hard to excel academically, right? It's even harder to be cool because now the competition gets even tougher in high school, right? You have students that are even closer to being adults, right? And the competition gets even tougher. There are students that are college bound, right? I want to go on to college, many students, but there's a problem. Teachers often assume that students have mastered formal thinking, that students have mastered, this critical thinking or logical thinking, instead of teaching students how to actually do it. Remember in high school, right? When teachers yell at you, right? Or they give you, work and just assume that you know how to do it without actually teaching you how to do it. Those bad teachers, right? Good teachers don't assume that you know this stuff. They teach you how to do it, or they test you and they see where you are, and then they, adapt to whatever the needs of the class are. It's just they assume that you know how to write instead of teaching you how to write. And it happens even in college, okay? Many college classes here, right, where the instructor will assign a paper and they won't tell you how to do the paper. Just write me a damn paper. And then they get mad when it's not good. Remember, right? I told you guys about writing a paper, and I showed you guys, you need to go here to look for your information. This is how you cite, this is how you reference, this is the way I want your paper to look, right? That stuff, right? A lot of teachers just assume that you already know, right, without actually teaching you how to do it. And that's not good, right? There's also increased classes that are assessed by externally scored exams that do not assure college readiness. There's a lot of these, basically advanced classes like AP classes, where you take college level classes, let's say, right? And you take these AP exams, right? These externally scored exams, exams that are basically scored by not your teacher, but by other people, right? There's all these exams, right? So you take these classes graded by the exam, that are scored with these exams. And these classes don't necessarily prepare you for college. They're supposed to, but they don't always do that. I took a bunch of AP classes. I took like 5 of them. And then I went to MIT. And I can tell you, I wasn't ready, okay? I was miserable. I was not ready to function at that level. That's what happens to a lot of students, especially those, by the way, that are poor and underprivileged, right? They go to these really bad schools. They take these AP classes. The teachers are not that good. The classes are not that good. And they're not ready for college. And then they go to college and they fail miserably. And they drop out. And if they keep trying, right, they'll pick themselves up, go to a community college, transfer, and then eventually get their degree. But see, in 2016, AP classes were taken by about 1/3 of all high school students. That's a lot of AP classes, okay? Compared to less than 1/5 in 2000, less than 1/5, 19% in 2003. When I was in high school, not everybody took AP classes. It was only a select group of students, those that were doing well. Those were the ones who were allowed to take AP classes. Of course, parents didn't like that, and we've been increasing access ever since. And more people now take these AP classes, but they don't necessarily prepare you for college. But if you pass the AP exam, then you can get college credit for that class. But doesn't mean you're necessarily ready for college. You want to get ready for college, right? You want to be ready? Go take some actual college classes, right? At the actual college. Like community college prepares you for college, right? We're a community college here. We do give you college level classes, right? But a lot of students aren't even ready for that. And they have to take lower level classes first before they can get to that English 101, before they can get to those other classes that they actually get college credit for, right? But here's a place, right, that is more likely to prepare you. In high school, yeah, you might be thinking that you're prepared, but it depends on the quality of education you're getting. There's also, testing. Secondary students in the United States take many more tests than they did even a decade ago. There's a lot of testing nowadays. A lot of achievement tests, SAT tests, AP tests, a whole bunch of different tests, including high stakes tests. High stakes tests are tests basically that that determine a very important outcome, like tests that determine whether you're going to graduate, like having basically what they call an exit exam. Okay, you want to graduate from high school, right? You're taking these classes, you pass. Okay, you need to prove to us that you've learned enough by taking this test. And if you don't pass it, you don't get to graduate. Or if you don't pass this AP test, you don't get college credit for this course. Those are high stakes tests. There's a lot more testing nowadays. And this just adds a lot more pressure to students with already fragile egos. Here's another thing I want to share with you guys. There is some good news about high school, and that is that the dropout rate has been declining, especially you can see there for Latinos, right? Right, you can see this graph over here. It starts from about 1993 and goes to about 2015. The dropout rate has been declining, has declined for basically every group, but especially for Latinos. Look, in like 1993, that's right around the time that I actually graduated high school. It shows you how old I am, right? About a third of Latinos dropped out of high school, didn't graduate. And that has been gradually declined, actually declined very quickly. And now we're very close to, the other groups of people, right? but you can see Asians are the least likely to drop out. Okay, followed by European American white people, basically, then followed by Black people, and then Latinos are still more likely to drop out, but it's gotten a lot better. Okay, but I remember when I was in high school, yes, there was a lot more dropouts. And what happens when you drop out is you don't have a very good chance of having success in your life, of getting a good job, of even getting employment. It was a very bad thing for Latinos, especially, right? We had a very high dropout rate. There are alternatives to college. Not everybody goes to college, okay? That's what we think of, right? People want to go to college and, get an advanced degree or that kind of stuff, get a degree. But not everybody does. About 30% of U.S. high school graduates do not go on to college. It is very encouraging that most students now actually go to college. And by college, I mean at least community college. Some more than that, right? But about 30% of them, close to a third, don't go to college at all. Only about 30%, 37% of US students actually earn a BS degree. That's a Bachelor of Science, for instance, 10 years after high school. Keep in mind that some students start college and then maybe they stop for whatever reason, and then they may start again and they go back and forth. About 10 years, if you track students for about 10 years, about 37% of them actually will earn a 4-year degree, is what this says. Okay, most of them will not still. Okay, but a lot more people try. All right, it's better that you try, and the percentages have been going up. There are more people going to college, more people getting degrees. It used to be very rare that people went on to college and got these degrees. Like 100 years ago, and you graduated high school and you said you were going to college, people would look at you like, "What for? Well, are you crazy or something? What are you going to do that for?" It just wasn't necessary back then, right? But it's just a lot more necessary now. Nowadays, if you want a good job, you need a college degree. A 2-year degree doesn't even cut it anymore. A 4-year degree, a BA degree, a BS. And we're getting to the point very soon that you're going to need an advanced degree, master's or a doctorate, to be successful. Because even people with BAs nowadays are not making enough money to really make it. Not in California, that is. California is very expensive. In other states, maybe, right? But it's just getting tougher, and you need more and more education to have a decent quality of life. For those people who don't go on to college, vocational education geared toward job preparation is advised by some. Some people may go to a trade school. They might learn welding or plumbing or something else. They learn a trade. Okay, that can be useful as well. And by the way, if you do get some of that training, and you do and you want to have a job that actually pays you decent, make sure you go and work for a place that actually has a union, right? If that's the case, you're more likely to have a good salary, good benefits, and things like that. If you work for a place, especially in some other states where they discourage unions and they discourage things like that, guess what? You with that technical education, right? That certificate of this or that, right? They're not going to pay you much. They're going to pay you $10 an hour, $15 an hour, rather than the $30, $40, $50 an hour you should be making. And you can make as much money as you do as a college graduate with these technical jobs. But if you're in the right state and you work for the right employer, right? Not some other state where they don't believe in unions and where they won't pay you or even give you much job security. That's what unions are there for, to protect people's incomes and jobs and things like that. And they're attacking them and making them go away. Unions used to be more common in the 80s, and they've been decreasing since then because they've been attacking them and getting rid of them. Working outside of school, there are adolescents who work outside of school, who go to school and decide to also work while they're in school. And, that work that adolescents take is actually usually not work that people usually want to do. That, they don't usually want that to be their career, but because most adolescents actually take boring, dead-end jobs. I mean, you end up working on McDonald's or Burger King or working for Walmart as a cashier or something like that. And that's if you're lucky, by the way. You can get some of those jobs, right? They don't pay very well. They don't have good benefits. They're boring, dead-end jobs. You don't want to get stuck there, right? That's not what you want to do with your life. But a lot of them do it, or they work at Macy's or something like that, just so they can basically make some extra money on the side while they go to school. Students believe that works bring money, right? They want the money. And parents believe it's a good thing that work teaches responsibility. You need to earn, you need to find out, you need to learn how hard it is to actually make money so that you will respect money and you will be more responsible. But the research is not very encouraging. Seniors in high school who work, regardless of how many hours they work, usually have lower grades. Okay, they have lower grades. It's because they have other stuff to do. They study less. Okay, they have poor relationships with their parents and friends. They don't see them as much. Okay, and their relationships suffer. They're more likely to use gateway drugs. They're more likely to be exposed to drugs. They spend more time away, unsupervised, you know, away from adults, away from other people who tell them, hey, don't do these drugs, right? So they're more likely to encounter, you know, drugs, right? And girls especially are more likely to be sexually active. They're away from the home, away from parents. They meet people. They develop relationships. They're more likely to become sexually active, right? That's what the research shows. Research also shows other stuff about basically working while you're going to school during high school, right? The money earned during adolescence is not spent on necessities, things that you need, but it's usually spent on clothes, entertainment, cars, and drugs. Things that are actually not very important. That's what the research shows. That's what the money is used for. There is a cultural difference when it comes to working, right? In Japan, the common belief is that the obligation of the adolescent is to study, not to work or do chores. In Japan, they believe that basically adolescent students, they need to go to school, focus on school. They don't want them to work while they're going to school. They don't even want them doing chores. That's the parents' job. You go to school, you work hard, and you become successful. And that's actually the belief of a lot of Asian communities, a lot of Asian countries, where they believe that young people, right? Adolescents, kids, whatever, their job is to go to school and work hard, right? And get a degree and become successful. That's what they believe in. Here in the US, we believe in not just going to school, but also working, especially, by the way, if you're Latino, right? Or if you're poor. Sometimes you have to work while you go to school to help out the family because otherwise you don't make it. But they believe other things in other countries, right? Why do you think Asian people are so successful? They believe different things about intelligence. Their culture is different. They believe different things about school. They really believe in school and in working hard and getting an education. And it's working for them, okay? The rest of us, we need to believe more in education, okay? We need to believe that we can actually get better and smarter, you know, through effort, through hard work. That's it, you guys. Let me stop recording.